May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. To be frank, on receiving the rota and finding I was down to preach on the first Sunday of Lent, I was quite concerned as to how to proceed. Year on year, Lent has, in my experience, been a solemn season in which to contemplate the time when Jesus, immediately after his baptism, was sent into the wilderness by the Holy Spirit, a stay in which he wrestled with hardship, dangers and temptation as he discerned the vision and purpose of his ministry. A solemn and austere season into which nonetheless I have year on year willingly entered, encouraged along the way by many, many dear companions in the faith who have journeyed with me. A season in which I have chosen to practice self-denial, perhaps by giving up chocolate or alcohol or crisps or screen time. A season in which I have consciously decided to practice self-discipline, devoting time to Bible study, prayer and reflection, and often painful self-examination which through the years has taken me into dark wastes of my life I'd rather avoid, and brought me face to face with ugly fears I prefer to keep locked away. A time of penitence and reflection in which faith and friendships have been deepened, and hearts and minds prepared for the journey which we know must lead to the dark shadow of the cross. But this Lenten season feels way different, because the truth is that the last year has seemed like a protracted Lenten period, and one for sure that no one would enter out of choice. A wilderness season into which we've been thrust and in which we are still wandering. A cruel and unfamiliar and dangerous place in which we've had no choice in giving up so very much that we hold dear and so very much that enriches and gives meaning to our lives. A list which is too long and too painful to go into now. So what impact will the deprivations and the sorrow and the anxiety of these past dark months have upon our navigating this Lenten journey? What message can we take from the texts of this particular day? Well, at first glance, St. Mark's Gospel, unlike Matthew and Luke, gives no details of Jesus' stay in the wilderness. He states that after Jesus' baptism came an affirmation from heaven: "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." After which the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Brief this wilderness passage may be, but with Mark, every single word counts. And what first pops out, interestingly, is that Mark tells us the Spirit drove Jesus into this wild and barren place. Does this imply he didn't choose to be there? If so, this straightway connects and resonates within me in this particular time and context. Mark then states Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and was tempted. Again, he gives no details of what those temptations were or how he responded to them. It's left blank. And that gives space to wonder. How did he spend his time? Did he pray all the time, or sometimes just sit, aware of God's presence and love? Was he in this testing time filled with anguish and torment 24/7? Or did he sometimes stargaze or marvel at a grain of sand or a scorpion or a soaring eagle? How did he get through those dark, scary, cold, lonely nights? And it got me wondering, in the wilderness of this, our time, what temptations stalk me? What temptations stalk you? Perhaps the temptation to doubt. Where exactly is God in this anyway? Does God care? To apportion blame. the temptation to utterly despair and give oneself up to the inevitability of the creeping darkness, the temptation to respond to this difficult time with a growing bitter cynicism. And then Mark tells us he was with the wild beasts. What wild beasts, what dark fears lurk in the corners of my mind, in your mind? The fear of illness and death, for sure. The fear of losing precious loved ones. The fear of loving security. The dark fear that can come with loneliness and isolation. And yet, in the depths of this wilderness, Mark's words instill hope. For there was always in Jesus' heart and mind the voice of God. You are my beloved. And there was the Holy Spirit giving strength. And there were angels along the way. In these dark days, may I never forget, may we never forget, that we are all beloved of God, created in his image, beloved and precious. And that through Christ we are gifted with the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, literally the one who gives strength. That in this, our wilderness time, there is still God's provision. Remember that we can still encounter blessings and beauty and joy in unexpected places. That there have been and will be angels along the way. People who, even though they may not be aware, are messengers of God. Folk who in dark and barren times come alongside and uplift hearts and spirits, perhaps through a word of advice or wisdom or encouragement, or through acts of kindness or compassion, or just by being there. Folk who are literally a godsend. And in these dark times, may we be assured of the presence of Christ, who came as Emmanuel, God with us, in total solidarity with us, the one who knows and understands our heartache and doubts and struggles and sorrows and walks with us, even in the darkest valley. I end with the moving words of a dear mentor and friend, Reverend Selina Garner, who describes a recent experience of God's provision in this wilderness time, of the presence of the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, giving strength. The power of prayer, the power of God's love to unite us in time and space, of encountering strangers who are as angels, and of the tangible presence of Christ, our light and guide, even in the darkest place. She writes, I find that I still need to learn to walk in the darkness. I sat in a nursing home car park today after being asked to offer last rites to a beloved mum. 2 of the amazing care staff wiped clean and then took the holding cross I had brought to her in full PPE. They also took 2 phones, one to call me and one to call her daughter, who called her sister on another phone so she could also join the prayer. Together, the 6 of us in 4 different locations prayed together for Christ to accompany this precious lady on her final journey. The care staff held their hands over her to bless her. I prayed the words, and we all surrounded her with love. I am so humbled by those 2 young women working on the COVID-19 frontline who went out of their way to make this morning possible, and in whom I saw Christ. Tonight I pray for the lady who was so close to her final breath, and for her daughters unable to hold her hand. Tonight I pray we can all learn together to walk in the darkness with Christ. Amen.